There is no public space online. And this is something that we could, if we wanted to, fight for in Web3 and the Metaverse, because right now it's a lot of brands. Like there's money to be made, but there's also society to be made. And how do we want the society there to be made?
Hello and welcome to the Culture and Technology Podcast. My name is Severin Matusek, and this is the second episode of our Metaverse special. Who are the people shaping the future of the internet? In our last episode, we heard from artist collective Kaiken and the curators of Vienna's Cyber Festival on how virtual spaces represent our bodies and identities. In this episode today, we invited two more experts who are bringing virtual experiences to life. Those are Merel van Helsdingen, who founded Next Museum in Amsterdam, which is the first museum in the Netherlands dedicated to new media art, and Tina Lorenz, an expert on digital theater and current project manager of digital development at Staatstheater Augsburg. When it comes to physical institutions like museums and theaters, which often have 100 years of history embedded in them, how can they bring virtual experiences to us? Should they even do that? Should they enter virtual space, or should they stay purely physical? And vice versa, how can we take digital work and bring it into the physical world in a meaningful way? What we will hear now is a recording of our panel discussion at Vienna Creative Days from June 2022. I started the conversation with a comment about artistic freedom in virtual worlds. In physical space, after all, artists have to deal with constraints like the size of a room, the fabric of a canvas, or the size of an audience. But these constraints don't really apply to virtual spaces that have completely different parameters of time and space, which are essentially up to us to define and create. These virtual worlds are basically worlds that are up to us to create, and probably a lot of the rules that apply to physical theater or a lot of the rules that apply to traditional art don't apply to virtual worlds. I also found your example beautiful of the artist who didn't feel represented in their identity and thus created his own virtual world where he felt represented. So how do you think artistic freedom is changing in these virtual worlds that we are creating right now?
Well, I think for starters, when people design for the virtual world, some people call it the metaverse or one of the metaverses. But from a design point of view, you don't have any constraints. So there's no gravity, there's no floor and ceiling. So how come so many of the virtual galleries have a floor, a ceiling, and paintings on the wall? Like, what is going on? So I think I love the question, because I think we should actually ask the question also to maybe create that discussion, because there are no boundaries. So why do people still attach themselves to what they know? And I think some companies are totally smashing it. Like, for example, the Fabricant that has an exhibition now at Next. They have a space, and it's showing their digital fashion pieces. But they've been asked by so many traditional fashion houses, can you make this bag exactly the same virtually? And they say, no, we don't do collaborations with fashion houses. We don't recreate your existing piece, because we're here to break the boundaries and to reinvent what can happen in this imaginary world where there are no rules. I think it's really important for artists kind of coming into this space to just almost drop everything you previously thought you had to stick onto. And I mean, there's new constraints. It's really hard to create beautiful environments in the metaverse because there's still rules. And for example, if you now start creating an avatar, you choose a male or a female avatar. So there's new constraints, for example. I just learned from our Harriet Blend, who made a beautiful avatar for us, that if she wanted to create a black avatar, she had to pay extra, but she could get the free white avatar. And she's now protesting and coming back at that company to complain and saying, what is wrong with you? So forget the constraints in the real world. And fight the constraints that are happening in the virtual world. But I think the opportunities should become endless, and that's the beauty of it.
We're coming a bit from the other side of that equation, because in theater, traditionally everything's possible, but a lot of the people we work with in virtual reality come from commercial backgrounds. They maybe come from universities where they've been told you're going to work in a game studio and this is what to expect. This is how you design a very flawless and easy piece that is very slick. And for commercial uses, we don't do that. We want to look behind that facade. We want to look deeper into topics and really dig deep. We need to find people who can be brought to think like that and who can be brought to break their own rules of their own profession. And also, yes, there are new rules. Sometimes there are as easy as you don't drag around a 360-degree camera, because then everyone in your audience will puke. This is really something that we do not go against. And a lot of theater people, they still say, I want to test the boundary. And we always say, no, that's one boundary we do not test.
In talking about constraints, what I liked about your presentation, and I know from your background in Chaos Computer Club, you also introduce open source projects, open source technologies. Obviously, whenever we talk about art or experiences that are created with technological means, we are dependent on the companies that produce these technologies, the rules that they imply, etc. So how do you try to break free from that, for example, by using open source technologies to probably not be that dependent on the big data companies, for example?
Well, sometimes you can't. There is software that is commercial software, and when you have a developer who says, I can do this software, you got to use it. But what we can do as a publicly financed institution, which is a state theater in Germany, you can try to convey all that you learned, to talk to other people so that they don't make the same mistakes. You have the privilege of experimenting and trying things out and giving advice to people who can maybe not afford those same experiments. You can tell them what works and what doesn't, so they can skip ahead. And this is something that we've been doing for the past 2 years very excessively, because we think building the skills and is one thing, but then sharing them is something that we can introduce to the theater world, which is not a very sharing culture business in itself. With digital technology, we are all at the very beginning, because up to 2019, most of the theater world was vehemently against using digital technology on stages. There were a few outliers, but most of the business was very analog. And I think we're past that. But we can use this movement of beginning to introduce new practices of sharing knowledge, which is something that we've been doing.
Does this apply to you as well?
Well, yeah, I think to your question, I think about those software companies or tech companies, and they have their products and you have to use them. But I also think like artists are kind of the pioneers, I feel. Like they're changing the game. They're activists, they're tech developers, they're always pushing the boundaries. And I found that often either they develop their own tools because they're like, this doesn't work, whatever, I create my own layer on the other layer and we are all totally lost. But all the developers totally understand, because it's all a community of collaboration. So if Helene Blanc and our artists developed a new technology or a new software system to build something on top of something that couldn't be done before, she shares it into the world of developers, and then everyone can use it. So I think that is really, really beautiful to see. And what you see as well is that some companies are actually open for change. So one of the blockchain companies we now work with, we just sent them a list of feedback saying these are the things we want, and now they're implementing some of those changes because they actually want to learn from institutions, learn from artists who are paving the way, and create better software. But yeah, it's not for every software company, and like I just said, often money comes in the way, and so it depends who you work with. But we've been working also with some really pleasant partners who are adding features and changing things to accommodate the arts.
I would also like to talk about maybe the changing nature of artists and creators, which is something I think you both mentioned, where you mentioned an example of a software developer who created art and who still has a hard time defining themselves as an artist. And I wonder, if that also translates to theater or dramatic art or performance. Will we see new types of actors, for example, in the metaverse or in the virtual reality? Or even if I think about, influencer culture and a lot of the creators out there that stream on Twitch or on TikTok, those are also sort of actors, enacting personas, etc. Are you considering that as maybe including that in your future art pieces? How is it changing?
Well, we are very open, but the theater, the institutions themselves, they are very critical. Or they tend to ask us, is that theater what you're doing? Is it not gaming or video or whatever? And we have a very, very simple answer to that. We say, well, we are a theater, so everything we do is by definition theater. And this opens up so many new possibilities. We are extremely free in what we are doing and exploring. So, yeah.
Do you think that there's going to be a new type of actor successful in the metaverse or in the virtual reality?
There's new acting skills. I have one colleague who is in his 25th year of being in the same house. And he said, well, Tina, it's all very nice what you do, but it's not for me. I'm a stage actor. I need the stage. I need the physical exchange with the audience. And for his anniversary, his 25th stage experience anniversary, my artistic director put him in a 360-degree video production. He was alone in there. It was a monologue. It was beautifully made, and he was great in it. And he needed to kind of get over his own shadow and perform for the camera, which is something that he was adamantly not having before. He did it beautifully. But he said it was very weird because there was this thing, this globe camera thing, and everybody said, well, you know your lines, we'll see you when you're done, just say when you're done, we are going. And then they closed the door from the outside because with a 360-degree video, as a director, you cannot be on scene. So he was very alone, and that was uncomfortable for him. And he had to kind of find ways to connect to that piece of technology as if it was the audience member that was seeing it later. And he did it. So, yeah, I think we need new skills, and we need to broaden our expectations of what performance art is and what digital performance art can be. And Merel and I talked before. It is really a question of intersectionality because performing art and visual art and digital art, it's all melting away the differences that we thought we had between our institutions and between our art forms, and it's making completely new connections.
So I think the role of the artist has totally changed. I think one element of it is that it's not necessarily the individual artist god, but it's a collective, because these kind of more technical works, often it's not made by one person. Of course, sometimes there's one visionary behind it, but every art piece that we've installed comes with a whole studio, a whole group of people. Everyone has their own task and everyone is collaborating. So Marshmallow Laser Feast, for example, they are 5 people and the whole team is a whole studio of maybe 20 by now. And also UVA was 3 people sitting in the space. Lucy McRae worked with so many different people, building, scaling, making, developing. So I think one thing that's changing, it's not about that one individual, but it becomes about the practice and the group and the vision. I think the other one is that for artists, they have to do a lot more work. So there was this incredible meme just sold on the blockchain by Dadara, and there was one image which said artists making artwork and sex, drugs, and rock and roll, which was like 80%, 20%. And now it's like 20% artists making art, and the other 80% is artists on social media. Because an artist now, you have to do your own marketing. You can have a gallery, you can have incredible shows at institutions, but if you don't have Instagram, Twitter, Discord, Twitch, TikTok, and probably 5 others that are coming to us, you are not going to be found. And the reality is that social media has become incredibly important for artists to be discovered, to share their message, to connect with their audience, and no one else is going to do it for them. So I think that's a really, really big shift in the role of an artist, but also the job an artist has to do now.
Which is ironic, right? Because on social media, there is no artistic freedom. You cannot just show anything on there that you could show in a gallery because you're a user and you are restricted by usage agreements and you can be banned from those platforms just by doing your art.
Yeah. No, it's totally restrictive. And also the fact that now artworks are made in the square because Instagram is a square. So how come the square is now a thing when you can do all sorts of types of projections and screens? But people think now in the square, which is crazy.
That brings me to the point of the role, maybe the changing role of institutions. Because you've just built an institution, the next museum, and of course you are dependent on selling tickets, getting sponsors, etc. But you could argue that probably a lot of the artists that you exhibit do not need an institution anymore to get seen. They'd have their own following. It's a hypothesis. And at the same time, as a theater, you have the opposite challenge of, do people still need you because there's so much entertainment out there on Twitch, on other platforms? Do they still need the Staatstheater Augsburg to create digital content in a sea of massive digital content? So how do you see your role as institutions in creating that relationship to the audience? What part are you playing in that?
I think it will always be important to tell the story. And yes, an artist can do their own work, their own promotion, their own show in a metaverse or wherever. But I do think there will be a need for physical experiences, for connection, for debate around it, for coming together and improve, brainstorm, make, experiment. So I think that's one part of the role of an institution, creating that space for experiment. Like we did with the dancers, creating artist residencies where you bring people together that normally wouldn't come together. And from there, new things will grow and incredible art will be shown to people. The other element, I think, is some of the artists we work with love that they're now part of a big group show where we shine a different light on the artwork, because the work now is about these virtual identities and we bring it back to surrealism, to moments in history, to trends in society, and actually seeing those works in a way that we tell a story around a certain topic. That is really important for artists to be seen by new communities, new people, and also to have people be educated around their work.
So it's providing context and sense making.
Yeah.
In a theater, we have those usually historic buildings that we need to fill. They have 600 places, they have 1,000 places, and they need to be full every evening. Also, these are the places that are historically open public spaces. They're public spaces in a city where dialogue happens, where discourse happens, and we do have a responsibility to facilitate that, to facilitate discussions about social change. And we can do this in the city, but we are all digital beings. Right now, digital transformation is the biggest transformation since the Industrial Revolution. So it involves all of us. And I think that we need to find, as a theater, we need to find space in the digital, but we missed that 20 years ago. Because 20 years ago we thought, no, we are an analog art form. We do not have a place in the digital. And right now, that's what we're missing, because there is no artistic freedom, there is no public space online. And this is something that we could, if we wanted to, fight for in Web3 and the Metaverse, because right now it's a lot of brands. Like there's money to be made, but there's also society to be made. And how do we want the society there to be made? Theater and artistic institutions have a responsibility and I think an opportunity to speak up and say, what about freedom of expression? What about artistic freedom? What about everything that we cherish about public space?
I also have a perfect example of an artist that's basically shows that we are absolutely not needed in a way, because we asked him before the pandemic, before the crisis, to be part of Next, and somehow it didn't happen in the end, but we're still having good relationships. And we asked him again in 2021 for the new show, and his rates gone up through the roof, and he basically said, no, I don't think you can afford me. I make so much money in the blockchain. I drop NFTs every week. You know, maybe I can do it for free to help your institution. And we were like, what happened? Like 2 years of time, we were supporting the artist that needed it. And now he wanted to support us by giving us his wonderful, incredible digital work. So definitely the things have shifted incredibly.
The Culture and Technology podcast is produced by the Vienna Business Agency. The Vienna Business Agency supports businesses, the economy, and the city to develop Vienna's creative industries further.